No one can heal me but myself. So the daily habit were huge for me. So I had the daily habits of prayer. I had the daily habits of reading God's word.
And Primal Questions really represents what I call your apex emotional need, the number one need that has to be met. And when it is met, we are our best selves, we are flourishing. But when it goes unmet or denied, we scramble.
You do not have a choice unless you're conscious. So I started becoming conscious of my numbing ways I would numb myself. I became conscious of different habits and behaviors. That was a huge change. And the second change was really being compassionate.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Primal Question podcast. I'm Mike Foster. And the whole point of us and these conversations and topics is to help you understand those hidden forces in you that influence your decisions, your choices, your relationships, your gifts and your strengths. And I'm excited to talk about how this plays out in our lives, how it plays out in our bodies, how it plays out in our stories. And I'm joined today with a new friend, Suzanne. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thanks.
So we were talking before we started recording about some of the interesting things that you do with people. And part of your work is around somatic and body focused work. Mm-hmm. Tell me a bit about that before we're going to talk about your primal question, but I want to know just about what do you do there?
Yeah. Well, it was my own personal journey. I'm very heady and I'm a learner, a personality. And so I really wasn't in my body. So I was overriding my body a lot. Mm-hmm. So my body would be like, no, you don't want to do that, or you don't want to take that job. My body, basically was signaling that, but I wasn't really listening because I was listening to this. Oh no, I have to take it because it's, what I need and this and that. Mm-hmm. And in 2010, I found out I had an autoimmune disease and I literally couldn't get out of bed for 8 months. And so it just made a huge impact on my life. And I realized that I needed to do a lot of things to kind of get well. And so I started with health. I started with my diet. I started with biohacking, things like that. And I got to a certain point, but then I just realized and went to my first actual breathwork class and started doing yoga and was realizing, wow, I am not in my body whatsoever. And so I realized that I had a lot of emotional stuck trauma in my body, as well as energetic blockages, and realized that this is not gonna get me free.
So talk to me about, again, there's a reason why you are in your head.
Yes. It was comfortable. It was familiar. I'm at control. Mm-hmm. I have really, I love to be in control, even though we're never in control. Right. But that's my go-to. Yep. My brain is safe. So I would be very logical and I would just mull over things. Why was always my question. I needed to figure things out. And so being in the body was not familiar to me. Mm-hmm. And so when I started, really getting into the body, another thing that I really avoided most of my childhood and into my probably the last 20 years is when I've been working on it, but my emotions, I really suppressed my emotions. I never saw my mother cry, never saw my father cry, and we didn't show emotion. My parents weren't physical, weren't verbal, so I had no emotional support, and so I just really hid that away for decades.
So how, if they weren't physical, emotional, or verbal with you, how did they show up with you?
Provided clothes on my back and food on the table.
And that was the extent of their interaction?
Yes, because that was my grandparents. It's generational. Mm-hmm. And so my father only knew what he knew, right? And so he never spoke "I love you" to me my whole life until just recently when my mother passed. And from my own healing, I got to really have that conversation with my father that I never thought I would have. And I told my father, you don't want our mother to pass. You do not want your wife to pass away with ever verbally telling her you love her. Mm. And so my parents live in LA, and I came back down to San Diego. And then when I went, I was going back and forth when my mother was sick with cancer. So I went back, and my father came up to me immediately and he said, I've got to tell you something. I've been telling your mother every night that I love her. And that was a big piece for me for my mother. And then after she passed, my father finally said it to me.
What did that feel like?
Um, I didn't need it anymore because I love Jesus is in me. I love myself. I get a lot of my value. My external clinging has gotten less. Um, I was happy for him. I was happy for him because when you tell someone you love them, which my best friend actually had to teach me to do that because I'd never heard that before. And so when you actually do that, I think I mean, I'm grateful, but I think that I'm just super proud of him. And I think it had more of an effect on him. So now when I say I love you, when I get off the phone, sometimes he says me too. Sometimes he says it, not often, but that's okay. That's okay.
So you mentioned some emotional trauma. Was most of that just in terms of your early childhood experiences with your parents, or were there other things that were going on?
Yeah, great question. Yes, a lot of my childhood, I was sexually assaulted. So that was buried deep inside. I buried it so much I forgot until I was watching a TV show. And I started just freaking out, like literally crying, sobbing. I had to turn it off and realize that what was happening to the woman on the TV show happened to me.
Wow.
And so that was a huge eye-opening, kind of buried stuff as well. So yeah, so a lot of emotional stuff, but also that as well.
How many years was that buried like that?
As
That
about
trauma.
5 years. And then I think I had a lot of trauma in the jobs that I was in. I was in a very male dominant position, and I was emotionally abused in those environments as well.
So the idea of being in your head and thinking about things makes so much sense to me, because to allow that to go anywhere else in terms of our being or our personhood
Yeah.
is too risky to feel the depth of
Oh,
that
yeah.
trauma.
Yes. The pain, right? Is it going to go away? Is it going to stop? I didn't have any tools to be with my pain, to be honest with you. I was never taught that, right? If I was, let's say, having a tantrum or having emotions, right? My parents didn't know how to regulate. They didn't know how to be with that. So what would they say? Go to your room, calm down. It's not as bad. My mother very much dismissed what was happening in my life. So if someone hurt me or was mean to me, oh, Suzanne, it's your fault. So my mother dismissed me a lot as a child as well. So of course, now I have no intuition, right? So when I am being told, inside, maybe in my mind, but my heart really, right? Your mind can tell you all stories, but when your heart and your intuition really tells you to do something, if someone has told you all your life that what your reality isn't reality, how are you going to believe yourself? So I didn't believe myself. I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust God, really. It's really hard.
So, wow. Okay. So the journey that you've been on to go from living in your head, not trusting yourself, not trusting your intuition, to where you are today. Talk to me about what happened for you to move into sort of this new way of showing up in the world.
Yeah. Well, I had to start being with my emotions and learn how to do that and gain the tools to do that. We could go into the autonomic nervous system. I teach on the nervous system, but I was very in fight or flight most of the time, very busy, distracting. So I really, to be honest, my first step was becoming conscious of what I was doing. You cannot change. You do not have a choice unless you're conscious. So I started becoming conscious of, my numbing ways I would numb myself. I became conscious of different habits and behaviors. And that was a huge change. And the second change was really being compassionate to
Mm-hmm.
myself.
Yes.
I was very hard on myself, very, very hard. And obviously, because I was a perfectionist and an overachiever getting my value. So, of course, I'm going to be very hard on myself.
Mm-hmm.
So, my language had to change. So, that was a big, big movement for me. But the biggest change was really taking ownership. No one can heal me but myself. So the daily habits were huge for me. So I had the daily habits of prayer. I had the daily habits of reading God's word, but I didn't have the component of the embodiment piece of sitting with that, soaking in that love, soaking in that, and really understanding that I'm having a human experience. Emotions are human experience. So do I allow the anxiety to spiral me, or do I be with it, know that it's an human experience and it will pass, right? So it's speaking things, speaking truth as well. So all of those things really were helpful. But I think the biggest thing is becoming conscious of what I was doing.
What, as you became more conscious and aware
Mm-hmm.
of your body, your emotions, just some, obviously the coping mechanisms,
Yeah.
when you got connected to the emotional part of you,
Mm-hmm.
do you remember what emotion you were most uncomfortable to meet?
That's a good one. I think being a good girl, I wasn't allowed to be angry.
Uh-huh.
So anger was a big one. I was so glad that I knew how to get out anger when my mother got cancer. Like I was so angry.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And if I didn't move that, that would have been not not good. I think as women, we're told we can't be angry. So anger was a big one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my predator. I think this was a big one too. So I was a sexually assaulted, and then I had a peeping Tom,
Mm-hmm.
actually. And my biggest healing around that was I was sad for them. I was never angry. And I think it was because I wasn't raised a Christian, but I became a Christian quite young in high school. And I think you're not supposed to be angry. You're supposed to love everyone, right? And so my immediate reaction after that incident, I cried for the person. I was sad for the person. I never got angry at him
Wow.
until I was in therapy.
Uh-huh.
And I was in somatic therapy, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I was not in talk therapy. And went back to, because I don't believe that you should ever go back to the situation because that's re-traumatizing. It's getting
Mm-hmm.
into the body.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back to the situation very quickly and then was like, okay, what's living in my body? And man, anger came out like you have
Yes.
no understanding.
Yes.
But I didn't know how to move the anger. I didn't know how to
Mm-hmm.
be with the anger. Now I do. I teach my clients how to be with anger, yelling, giving your emotions a
Mm-hmm.
voice. So I yell a lot in pillows and cars.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think anger was a big one. And I think sadness. I was sad all the time. But my somatic therapist said, Suzanne, you have a lot of sadness in your life. It's okay. So what's underneath that sadness? What's the root of that sadness, right? And so I had to really get to some roots of these emotions.
So what would you say to somebody who is experiencing anger? Let's start with anger first. You have absolutely a um, right response to injustice
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and assault and trauma, and it's such, to me it's like such an important emotion to
Yeah.
experience. Most of us have no idea what to do with it,
Mm-hmm.
and most of us feel guilty for feeling it.
Yes. Yeah.
What would you say to somebody who's listening who has like real anger,
Mm-hmm.
rightfully so?
Mm-hmm.
How do we process it?
Yeah. Well, first we have to understand that all emotions are equal. So
Mm-hmm.
joy and anger are the same.
Mm-hmm.
So
I
really
love that.
believing that, right? happiness, joy, sadness. It's all energy, it's all emotions. So first saying that, like, anger is not bad,
Yes.
and really sitting with that, right? And where is that belief in the body that I don't believe that, right? So I might say that a few times, right? You have to ground, and there's a lot of things you need to do to not be here. If I'm in fight or flight or numbing myself, I can't heal.
Right.
So I have to be in the safe and social. So that means I have to get in my, start breathing. Breath is really important to calm us down. But once I do that, and then I just kind of be with myself and say, okay, why do I have this belief that I can't be angry? And sometimes something will come up, like your mother or your father, whoever will tell you, right? So then a really great way to move anger is to hit something really great. So a lot of times what I do is I kneel beside my bed, and you want to use your body and you want to just hit and
Yes.
use your voice, ha, ha, and get it out. Now you never want to believe that person, you're hitting that person, or if you have a punching bag, right? Boxing is really good in hitting something that way, right? But you never ever want to believe it's that person, because again, it's re-traumatizing. You're getting the anger out. Could be screaming, giving it a voice, but usually hitting something, getting a racket, hitting something. I did that. Like I said, there's been different times in my life when I've gotten it out. Sometimes I'll be doing my practices in the morning and I'll just sense the anger and I'll just turn around and start maybe hitting the ground. So that's usually a really good way of getting out anger.
So good. I remember an exercise that I did. I have sexual abuse in my early childhood. And I remember doing an experiential exercise where I did it in group work. And I had like a baton, like soft bat, and this little block. And I remember hitting the block and saying the words, "I have a right to my anger."
Yes.
Just so powerful, like just to say those words out loud. And at first, you think, "Oh, this is ridiculous. This is dumb."
Yeah.
And I just remember not only myself, but also watching other people do this exercise of tapping into their anger. And it starts like this: I have a right to my anger, black. I have a right to my anger, black. And then the intensity as you tap into the emotion, all of a sudden I am hitting that block, whacking that block so hard, Suzanne. I'm like, oh my gosh, where is that coming from? But where it's coming from is this: hey friend, you and I have a hidden force driving our lives. It drives our choices, our behaviors, our triggers, our relationships, and even our strengths and our gifts. And most of us have no idea what it is or how to control it. And this hidden force is an unmet emotional need. There are 7 of them, and I call them the 7 primal questions. And when you don't know your primal question, it can wreak havoc on your life because people will do whatever it takes to meet this need. And we can even try to meet that need in some pretty unhealthy ways. But when you identify your core emotional need, a lot of things begin to make sense. And you'll have the clarity to meet emotional needs for yourself and others in much healthier ways that have far-reaching effects on your life and your relationships. Take 5 minutes to discover your primal question today at primalquestion.com. Bottled up rage and anger that had no place to go. And finally it did.
You took the top off, right? Think of a champagne bottle, right? That's exactly what happened. And what I tell my clients is they're doing that, right? They're hitting something, right, during the session. And then when they stop, I'll say, ask yourself if you're complete. And sometimes you have to do it again and again and again and keep asking, am I complete? And there's layers, right? So you might have to come back and do it again, but always checking in too, because you might feel like, oh, I'm doing too much, right? But saying, is it enough?
One of the interesting things that I noticed during the exercise was several of the women, because you bring this up in your own story, really resisted the exercise. That like this was sacrilegious. It was absolutely inappropriate. like all those rules that they had put on themselves
Yeah.
about their anger.
Yeah.
Why do you think for women, especially, this idea of anger is, has to be like off limits?
Well, if we're good girls, we're not supposed to get angry,
Mhm.
right? That's a huge message to many, many women. There's a lot of good girl messages that we have to untangle in
Where do
our
you see
life.
that? And I totally agree with you on that. Where do you see that at play in our society or in our systems that we are in?
TV shows,
Hmm.
obviously our childhood, magazines, things you read. Yeah, everything. It's all around
Hmm.
us. Yeah, it's okay for men to get angry.
Hmm.
Job market, right? Oh, you're too emotional, right? When we get angry. But men, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that men are said or, okay with men, it's not okay for women. So you just have to realize that no, it is okay. Like you were saying, right? It is
Hmm.
okay for me to get angry. It is okay for me to XYZ. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about another emotion that's so good. Um, I love those like practical things around anger. So give me some practical things around sadness, another emotion that we're just messaged to all the time, like nobody can be sad. And, it's like
Yeah.
maybe that's changing a little bit, but in general, it's like we don't want to be around sad people.
Yeah.
They're kind of a downer, like all
Yeah.
this judgment that we put on ourselves when we feel
Mhm.
sadness and we
Mhm.
don't even know why we feel
Yeah.
sad.
Yeah.
Talk to me
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. Um, well, I think one question is the why question. It always brings us back here, and this will always protect us. So our mind will say, don't cry, right?
Hmm.
So we have to slow the brain down and we have to get in here, and that's when the sadness will come. So I would say, again, the best way to get out the sadness is you've got to do, I don't know, I'm such a proponent to somatic work and breath work.
Me too, by the way.
you you have to really do something to we rewire, right? Neuroplasticity, the
Hmm.
limbic system, which obviously is the emotional center of your brain. You have to rewire that, because if you were raised as a child and your mother said, or your father, you don't cry in this house, we don't cry, like my
Hmm.
parents, they never showed emotion, right? Until my mother passed away, it was the first time I saw my dad cry. And what did he do when he started getting emotional? Oh, I'm not usually like this. I don't cry.
Mm.
He said it to all the nurses, and I said to my dad, I kept saying, normalize it. Is tears any different than laughing? No, it's not. Yes, we think laughing is good because it's joy, but it's actually no different. We need both. It's a both and. So, what I would say with someone that can't cry, and to believe me, I get a lot of men clients, you've got to find something that will get you out of this. And I do teach a 3-part breath work that slows your mind down. It gets you in the body and allows the heart space to open, and the tears start flooding, and people
Mhm.
don't understand why. They're like, oh my gosh, how is this happening? And it's because you're not protecting yourself. And so you're allowing yourself to be with
Mhm.
yourself. So you've got to, I guess the biggest thing that if someone's listening and they're like, where do I start? Go to someone that can provide the tools for you.
Yes.
You've got to go get support to learn the tools, to then get accountable to do them. Again, I am the only person that can heal myself. I can't heal you. I can't heal
Mm.
anybody around me. If I heal, then other people will be affected,
Mhm.
right? But I have to start with myself. So if you don't have the tools to be with it, I would say find someone that can help you find the tools. But tears are okay. Tears
Mhm.
are energy moving out of the
Mhm.
body. Tears are healing. If you're not crying, you're keeping that stuff repressed and it's
Yep.
coming out in different ways.
Yes.
Painness in the body, migraines, lots of different things, because you're not getting it out. It has nowhere to go. So it's going
Mhm.
to create havoc in the body.
Yeah, I always say, the root word of emotion is motion, move.
Move.
It's gotta
Yes, that's
move.
good. It's really
And
good. Yeah.
so one of the things that I write about and this podcast is about, is understanding kind of the unmet emotional need that we have. And the 7 questions, the 7 primal questions really represents what I call your apex emotional need, the number one need that has to be met. And when it is met, we are our best selves, we are
Mm,
flourishing. But when it goes unmet or denied, we scramble to try to get that
mhm,
need met in
mhm.
usually unhealthy ways.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Mostly because the ways that we use to get that need met were formed in our early childhood. So they're kid ideas.
Yes.
They make sense to a kid, but we're applying these kid ideas to our adult lives and they're not working very
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
um, talk to me about the emotional impact, and you mentioned, you use the word emotional trauma, which I think is a really good word. Those imprints in terms of trauma or neglect, or just the that emotional need goes unmet,
Mhm.
how that plays out in people's lives in terms of as now as an adult.
Yeah. So if my emotional needs aren't being met, I have to get it somewhere.
Hmm.
So I might get it from food. I might overexercise. I might be
Hmm.
a workaholic,
Yep.
right? There's all different ways that I'm going to get those emotional needs met. So if I become a workaholic, then I'm going to get my value, which then, right, will give me that emotional dopamine, I guess is what
Hmm.
you want to call it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's looking at again, becoming conscious of, okay, why am I busy all the time? Why can't I sit down and be quiet? Because like you said, if I'm not used to feeling my emotions and that's not familiar to me, and I become quiet and all the emotion starts bubbling up, I have no skills or tools to
Right.
be with it. That is overwhelming, right? And so that's what I would say is that, we, like you said, if I'm a child and I didn't, I wanted to keep peace in my home. I'm a perfectionist. I wanted to be perfect to keep peace in my home. Also, my father was very up and down with his emotions. He was very eradicated. So sometimes he would be really just different things that he would do emotionally. I was scared. I feared my father.
Mm.
So I wanted to be so perfect, right? So if I wanted to be perfect and not make waves and I wasn't getting what I needed emotionally from my parents, what would I turn to?
Yeah.
Food, sports. I did a lot of sports as a
Hmm.
child. That gives accolades, right? And
Hmm.
value. So you're going to always turn to something else
Yes.
versus getting it internally inside of you or from a higher power if that's what you believe in.
Yeah, in the book, I share the story about Robin Williams, the comedian, how
Mm,
he had a mother who didn't love him. And
yeah.
so he turned to
Yes.
comedy and entertainment as a child
Yes.
to get her
Yes.
attention. And
Yes.
then obviously we as a society were blessed by his incredible skills of making people laugh and entertaining, but it was birthed in pain. It was birthed in this
Totally.
child trying to get his mother's love.
Yes. And I would believe that the way that I got love was I was really good at sports.
Mm.
And so my parents would go to all the events that's how I received that love that I was
Mm.
longing for, because the touch wasn't there, right? The verbal wasn't there. So I had to perform to then see it, right? And so that's kind of what happened. Yeah.
So do you see you're conscious, you're aware,
Yes.
my favorite phrase is I'm on to me now. Okay. I see what's going on
Oh,
here.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, how do you stay in that place? Because it's one thing to be aware, but then it's another to apply and stay in rhythms that keep us in this place of healthy adulthood and wholeness.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are some of the things that you do to now that you have had this just amazing uh, opening to truth about what was really going on, and you see the matrix?
Yeah.
How do you stay there?
Yeah. And normalize it. So when my ego starts saying different, wants to stay in the familiar, I just normalize it. I just
Mm.
say, "Of course you wanna go do that." Like,
Yes, so
that's
good.
easy,
Yeah.
right? And so does that bring you value? Is that going to get
Mhm.
you to where you want to be? Not really.
Mhm.
Okay, so do you want to do that or not? You have a
Mhm.
choice. And it's okay if you choose the wrong choice. It
Mhm.
really is okay.
Yeah.
Right. And so the going back to the compassion and the self-talk, right? And just really normalizing that it is hard. It is hard to go down a road that is not familiar, right? Our body and our mind, well, really our mind wants to stay in the familiar.
Mhm.
So I have to keep that language, right? Of, oh, there you are again, right?
Yeah.
Talking it kind of like a 5-year-old in a
Yes.
sense. I'm talking to myself like a
That's
5-year-old,
right. Yes.
loving myself through it. Like, yeah, this is going to be super hard, Suzanne. And you might not, it might not turn out the way you want to. But if you don't step forward, you'll never know. And
Mhm.
so just the language of constantly, I had a client right actually before I got here, and I just kept saying to her, you probably have to do it 100 times a day. She's like, what? And I said, yeah, it's more than once.
Yeah, more than once for sure.
Yeah. So it's constantly reminding myself
Mhm.
that am I trying to get rid of the anxiety? Am I trying to get rid of the sadness? Am I trying to get
Mhm.
rid of these emotions? No, it's a human experience. What I'm trying to heal from is spiraling around it, right? So once I start spiraling, then I can start saying, catch myself because now I'm conscious of what I'm doing. And I can say, okay, you're spiraling. Let's breathe. Let's get in the body. Let's really speak truths to this because what's happening right now, you're keeping yourself safe. You're keeping yourself in the familiar, which is, you're always going to go back to your childhood
Mhm.
tendencies. I believe you're whole. We're not trying to get whole, right? I've buried a lot of parts of myself, right? And so I'm welcoming all parts of myself. Suzanne, yes, that scared part is here.
Mhm.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
And the courageous part of here is here too, right? And so I try to welcome all parts of myself at all
Mhm.
times and just know that life is hard sometimes, but it's not going to be forever.
Yeah. I happily do 2 hours of therapy every month, and part of the ongoing work that I do is trying to welcome what I call Skinny Mike. And Skinny Mike is
Mm,
this younger version of me that I really detest,
yeah.
because he represents weakness. He
Yeah.
represents the victim from the abuse. And there's so many things about he's a quiet kid. Um, and so much of the work that I do in my own therapy is just trying to welcome
Mhm.
that part of me.
Yeah.
Um, but I also know that my judgment towards him
Yeah.
doesn't help.
Yes.
My and it's embarrassing to sort of say this, but sometimes my contempt towards
Yeah.
that part of me
Yeah.
doesn't help the situation. So learning how to welcome all parts and all
Yes.
pieces
Yeah.
and all of our history and
Yeah.
all of the things that we don't want to be but we actually are
Yeah.
is so much like, to me, that's just the core of the work of being whole.
Yeah.
um
And that's where I would say was a huge piece for me was when my therapist did tell me that word welcome, and she was like, Suzanne, just welcome the fear
mhm.
and let it speak. What does it want to say?
Yeah.
What does it want to communicate? Right.
Yes.
So I would say practical practices is that I always ground. So I do a lot of breath work to ground myself to be in the safe and social. Most people do not feel safe. If we're anxious, then we're protecting ourselves. We don't feel safe, right? So I have
Mhm.
to get safe in my body to then move or be with, right? Or welcome the fear, the anxiety, the whatever it is. So yes, I always welcome whatever emotions there. And then I just go into that's going into the heart space, right?
Mhm.
So just grounding, asking myself, what am I feeling in this moment? Now, to be honest, when I first started this practice, I didn't know what I was feeling because I'd buried my feelings for so
Right.
long. So I had an emotion. You can Google it. Just it's usually called like an emotional wheel.
Mhm. Can be bought on Amazon, friends.
Yes,
Yes.
and you can just most of them are free. You can
Mhm.
just get an emotional
Yeah.
wheel.
Download it. Yeah.
and download it. And because a lot of times I couldn't identify what I was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So it has all these emotions on it, and I would look at it. And you can also get ones with faces sometimes.
Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah. When you see something, you
Yes.
you can do emotional faces or words.
Mm-hmm.
So I would sit with the words and the faces, and I'd go, okay, that's it. That's the deeper issue of the sadness. And so I would, like you said, I welcome you, sadness, be with the heart space, right? Hands on the body. That's a cue that tells our body we're safe.
Mm-hmm.
Be with myself, welcoming that, and then going in the body. Okay, where is this sadness in the body? I'm not trying to move it. I'm just trying to say, I see you. I see you, sadness here. I see you, sadness here, right? Wherever it is. But again, I didn't know where that was because I wasn't in my body. So ask me how long I had to do this over and over every day for probably 3 or 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, oh my gosh, my throat chakra, I totally feel it in my throat. So now my father lives here and my mother lives in my belly. And I've had gut problems a lot of my life. And so I really, it's in here and here a lot. And so I'm with this a lot. And the repressed emotions are here. Yeah. So I'm in my body a lot with different emotions. Just being with it.
So good. Wow, Suzanne, thank you. This is, I wish I could talk to you for another 3 hours about this.
I know.
It's just such a wealth of information, and not just information, but helpful.
Yeah.
This is what people need to hear. They need to listen. They need to connect into the things that you're talking about, and not to be scared, not to just keep plowing ahead with old coping mechanisms just because that's all we know. There is a different path for people. And I think that's what you've really shown us, is that, and how important the body is to healing.
Yeah. And you can heal. That's one thing that I would say is start with one thing, because listening to this, you might be going, oh my gosh, where do I start? It's so overwhelming, right? So start with one thing, and then also know, because I have clients ask me this all the time, can I heal? It's like, yes, you can. You can bring parts of yourself, and you can get better. And, at one time, were you better? Yes. Right. And we can get better. And so that's one thing that I would continue to tell yourself is, yes, I can get better.
Could not agree more. It's that I always tell people, everybody likes to use the word broken. I don't believe that for a sec. It's just wounded. Yes. Yeah. Setbacks. Yes. Yeah. Hurts. Yes. But not broken, because broken can leave us in despair. Like we can't be fixed. Yeah. And, so much hope here. Yeah. And so much possibility, but we got to do the work too. Yeah. And
it's okay if you don't want to. It's another thing I really believe.
Such a good point.
Is like a lot of people don't want to do the work, and they just want to be who, you know what I mean? They don't think anything's wrong, and that's okay too. We can't, again, going back to, we cannot fix people. Like, believe me, I've tried. It doesn't work. But being okay with, if people in your life, you want to move on that journey and other people don't, don't pull people along with you. You just have to do it yourself, but it's okay if you don't want to either.
Yeah. Suzanne, brilliant stuff. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
I
appreciate you.
I love this conversation. So thank you so much for just sharing your wisdom and insight and your story with us today.
Appreciate that.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode of the Primal Question podcast. I hope you've learned something new about your primal question, or maybe the primal question of someone you know. If you think this episode would be helpful to a friend, I encourage you, please share it. Let people know about the podcast and how it's impacted you by sending a link to a friend. If you're ready to take the next step in your own self-discovery journey, I invite you to visit primalquestion.com/podcast. That's primalquestion.com/podcast for additional free resources and to explore the opportunity to work one-on-one with a Primal Question coach. Also, for those of you who feel a calling to guide others on their journey, there's information available about how you can become a certified Primal Question coach yourself. It's a powerful way to transform lives, including your own.